This week, in our main topic here on Mastering Dungeons, we are going to look at what has been released from the 2025 Monster Manual, look at the design, and compare it to what we saw in the 2024 Monster book. First of all, Teos, if people want to get their own analysis going, they don't have the Monster Manual yet. Where could they go to get that wrapped up?
I mean, they should stop. There's no Flumph preview yet, so I don't know what is even the
Oh,
point, Shawn. What's the point?
we're done. And end.
Thanks for that. Was our main segment. Good night. Thanks
That
to
was
all
the
our
main segment. Take
supporters.
care.
No, so Ian World actually has a pretty good thread. It's hard to parse it, and there aren't links from it, but they've gathered a bunch of them in one place because these previews have been scattered kind of all over the place. Some of them are in YouTube videos. Some of them are in the D&D Beyond website. Some of them are shown as images on Blue Sky. So you kind of have to hunt around. But our show notes, if you are a Patreon member, have all those links in there as well, so you can pick them up. And it's been interesting because these previews actually started quite some time ago with the Ancient Green Dragon, and things have changed even since the beginning of the previews, which fascinating.
Yeah. So first of all, it was interesting that the influencers who received preview copies of the Monster Manual, so it sounds like Wizards may have coordinated with them to say, why don't you preview this monster or this set of monsters? Because as you go through, there are different influencers looking at different monsters.
Yeah, I waited. I'm still waiting by the phone for the call to say that I got to preview the Flumph. And they're very busy at Wizards. I know they're going to call any moment, and let me know that I should preview the Flumph. I did get a copy to help me prepare for videos I'll release later, which I greatly appreciate because boy, am I preparing, Shawn. But I'm not in that elite group, so Ginny D and lots of other cool people, they've been able to show off these specific, as you said, they got like permission to release one thing in the same way that you may have seen, like, I think Ginny D got to talk about Bastions before anybody else got to talk about things, right? So there's some preview things that happened for other books. So with the and they're doing the same thing and saying, hey, you can share, the Cyclops or whatever it is.
I assume there's an embargo in place.
Yes, there is until the 20 some odd. So it's like a week or so. Yeah.
Okay. So not too terribly long. Then start talking. Okay. I'm in a similar situation in that I have a copy in order to do freelance work. So I'm trying to focus. Yep. Mm-hmm. Trying not to give away anything.
That's what's nice about these previews is we can focus on this part, which is all publicly known, and we can talk about it without upsetting our NDA side of our brains.
Yep. So let us dig in then. As Teos said, one of the first monsters we saw was the Ancient Green Dragon that was put up on D&D Beyond, I believe. And we know for a fact that now it's changed. It's changed since that preview. But we will look at that Ancient Green Dragon, the preview of it, and compare it back to the original. So what do we know about this Ancient Green Dragon, Teos, in terms of design and the move from 2014 to 2024?
Well, if I were brand new to things and hadn't been following anything, the first thing I would see is this interesting layout that jumps out at me, which is the stats, strength, dex, conics, etc., have these sort of slightly different color things with like blocks, and then it has like a modifier and a save next to it. And so this is before it would list the statistics in sort of normal text, kind of fade into the background. And then you would, if it had a boost to its normal save, you would see that, right? And I guess what they're trying to do is help you really break down the modifier versus the saving throw in case you need it. But I would just, layout wise, I'd be really surprised if like a lot of layout people would go like, yeah, this is great. It's also the thing that jumps out the most on the page. And I do not think this is the most important thing on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing that might jump out at you. Mm-hmm.
I agree. One of the issues with stat blocks for any edition is the amount of space it takes up versus the usefulness, the utility of the information in it.
Yeah.
And I spatially, I'm not sure it saves space to
No,
not
it's
just have
bigger.
a
Yeah.
saving throw line below.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the setting it off with different colors, or different shades, I should say. But yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
in the playing I've done with the new monster stats,
Mm.
I've had to take more time to find the information.
Mm.
And that may be because I'm used to the old information,
Sure.
or it may be that visually things are just not where I would intuit them to be anyway. So we'll have to wait
Yeah,
for
our
some
brains get
use.
used to it, right? So it'll
Yeah,
all
right.
fade into the background, but ideally your thing is intuitive to begin with. And it's fun if you just want to have for fun, just go break out like, a 2E stat block or a third edition stat block, fourth edition, and just suddenly your brain will go like, wait, I used to know this, and now I'm like parsing the fact that this is, complicated, and it is. All of them are. But this stood out to me as a thing that, you're going to notice this, and it's different. And is it better? That's a super arguable, which I take to heart. One of the things that when I'm looking at 2014 versus 2024, I take something that the third edition team said, is it demonstrably better?
Mm,
I'd say this is a no.
mm,
This is
yeah,
arguable, right? And you're
yeah.
not in the business of arguable. You should be in what they were saying is you should be in the business of demonstrably better. This is a
Mm,
sort of weird. It's like a choice, right? Rather than oh yeah, you solved something. You'll always have people that feel otherwise, but I don't think
right.
your numbers are going to be some high percentage of people go like, oh yeah, this is obviously so better and intuitive. And if I wanted something to glow on the page, it would probably be the attack value.
Hmm.
That's probably the thing
Sure.
I'm looking at the most that I need to jump out about all the text, right? Would be like attack and damage. That's what I might have put a glow up on it if you wanted things to glow. But anyway, um,
Yeah, I agree.
we see the usual breakdowns of traits and actions as they were before. The thing that's interesting here is this ancient green dragon, which is a legendary monster in 2014, doesn't have a legendary section in this early preview. It has a reactions section. And
Mhm.
this was a I think this came out in August, and this preview does not represent what we see in the ancient gold dragon, right? So it shows you that
Sure.
in August the team was still operating on this idea of we're going to remove legendary actions and we're instead going to make them reactions, and we're changing things that we're maybe going to get rid of some things in the 2014 rules that would remove the ability to use as a reaction, because
Mhm.
otherwise you would nerf, what was it? Uh, what's the cantrip that removes your reactions
Oh,
or zap
yeah, I know
somebody?
what you mean. Yeah,
I
it's
no, I can't think of it, but it'll come to us. I know
touch
you're,
the zappy
yeah,
electric
everybody at home,
shocking
you know what?
grasp.
Hey,
There we
shocking
go.
grasp. Yeah,
We got there.
right. So, the idea was, well, we'll remove that so you don't just shock and grasp the big bad constantly to just remove all of their legendary actions, right? Well, in the end, they went away from this, right? But this early example is fascinating because we get to see the idea of like you can take 3 reactions per round, but only once per turn. And so you could do that. What was interesting is you could do this either on your turn because it's a reaction, or you could do it off turn and like you could with a normal legendary. But only one, you had to space them out. So it's almost like the same thing, but a different part of the action
Yeah.
language. And so, it had its own kind of considerations to it. In the
Yeah.
end, they abandoned
It
this, and that's fascinating.
yeah. It's interesting because I actually like the idea of giving a monster like that multiple reactions
Mm-hmm.
to make it, harder for the players to move around it, to, oh, I'm going to soak up its reaction by, this small thing, and then hopefully we can do all these other things to then get away with it.
Yeah.
But in the long run, I didn't like this idea of trading out reactions for legendary actions, because the trigger is something that the players could mess around with,
Yes.
right? If there was a particularly strong legendary action slash reaction that was triggered by a ranged attack. Just don't take ranged attacks.
Yeah.
Right. And then we ended
Right.
up seeing reactions that were just like when the when another creature completes its turn,
Yeah.
you can take this reaction. Well, that's just a legendary action. Uh, so
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
it got
and
into a little
that's
too
exactly what
much.
we see
Yeah.
here, right? Charming Presence is when you end your turn. Corrosive Miasma is either when you use your legendary resistance or if you are hit with a ranged attack. And so then you do this thing. But yeah, if people are just attacking you melee, they get to shut down Corrosive Miasma from ever triggering. And yeah, so
Right.
yeah, it's interesting, right? And so maybe you can just, but yeah, it's a level. Now you have to really be paying attention to this section, right? It's one thing to say that, hey, I need to remind myself when a player ends their turn, I may want to do one of these things, cross it
Right.
off my list. It's another to say, I need to watch out for every time someone uses a ranged attack or makes me make a save and I choose to, like that's even more complicated thing. So I'm glad
Yeah.
they moved away from this, but it is surprising to me because how you're designing your monsters is important. And you apparently had not made up your mind at the time when you'd already printed the first two books.
Right.
And
Right.
that is also indicative of a team that's a little bit scrambling, at least in this regard,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
maybe not. Maybe team members would say to me, we just made this one decision, Teos, don't make a big deal out of it. And that's possible. But to me, this is a fairly big thing to still be working through and maybe why Monsters came at the end and in 2025, right? Because there was still this kind of development going on.
Yeah. I mean, I love the people on that design team,
Yeah, me too.
personally, professionally, and I can't imagine that they
Yeah,
weren't absolutely hustling and working long hours and not really getting the time necessary to bring all of this together. And it's just the nature of a very complex beast that you are trying to build piecemeal, and you end up with a bunch of gears, and these gears sometimes don't fit together. And it's not a knock on their skill, it's not a knock
yeah,
on their
yeah,
dedication, it's a knock on the planning, scheduling for these releases.
yeah. Can I say another thing that we've said? Absolutely well said, John. Another thing I just thought of is so it has a spellcasting block.
Mhm.
And in a recent video, the Jeremy Crawford and Wes Schneider were talking in all these monster videos, and they were saying that kind of dragons are often thought of as having possibly the ability to cast. And so for the older ones, they've just gone ahead and done that. So they're all
Yeah.
spellcasters at the upper age levels. And so we get these cases. And here in this version, we see, some at will spells, including Charm Monster at an upcast level 5 version, Dissonant Whispers at a level 4 version, twice per day Cloud Kill at level 8. There's also Gas, which is interesting, and then once per day Modify Memory and Polymorph. To me, this is super fascinating because it seems to take a step back from
Mhm.
what they did with Mordenkainen's, right? Where they wrote to us blogs saying, if it's an offensive spell, it's going to be an action. If it's utility, it'll be in a spell list. Not even
Mhm.
Mordecai's actually did that. They broke their own
Right.
rules
Right.
in that very book. But this seems to really step back because now not only do I deal with my 3 traits, my multi attack, my rend, my poison breath, my 3 different reactions, I'm also looking
Mhm.
up all of these spells. And while this is not as
Yeah.
bad a spell list as 2014 spellcasters tended to have, it's still 1, 2, 3, 4,
Mhm.
5, 6, 7 spells I, in theory, need to go pick up, and I'm either scrambling during the combat or that's additional prep time, right?
Yep. And what drives me crazy sometimes is they'll give a spell to a monster that already has a very similar thing in their stat block, right? We know that green dragons breathe poisonous gas. It has the miasma there. It has the breath weapon there. Cloud kill on top of that is just sort of, you've already got two things that do it. Do you need a third that's really
Yeah.
thematically similar? And what I loved about dragons from earlier editions, especially going all the way back to AD&D second edition, is the fact that they could cast spells, but the spells they cast were not even just utility spells, but I want to be able to cast haste with my dragon. Even if it's not on itself, even if it's just on the people helping it defend its lair, there's something that it's very important to the combat that it does it. And it's not something that it can do with its breath or with its presence or with anything else that it can do. And it tactically it's important. Uh, so I would love to see more that type of thing, or at least tell DMs the difference between your dragon fight and this other game master's dragon fight is go ahead and choose a third level spell that you think would be helpful to you as the game master to challenge and delight your players. I might choose haste, someone else might choose some other spell.
Yeah.
And that will, so it's not always the exact same things for the dragon every time you go into its lair.
What was your, out of curiosity, if you have a favorite, what was your favorite edition for dragons?
I have to go back to like first
Okay.
and second. I really
So
do.
I think third was probably my favorite. The fourth is right up there. Third, I
Mhm.
thought had really distinctive things. They also had the sort of like wing buffet, tail slap,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, yeah.
many attacks. So you felt like these things were, and this is before you had legendary actions, but they could just
Mhm.
tear into you in all these little ways that
Yeah.
were significant. Um, and then they would have things like the white dragon could buffet snow up and like conceal
Mhm.
itself so you couldn't see it, which when it was flying above you and you also couldn't see it was a mess. They could really easily like strafe you and do all this. That was significant. Frightful Presence was an impressive part of what they did. And fourth
Mhm.
edition took that Frightful Presence to where, like, almost any dragon encounter was it shows up, it takes a round, it stuns you, it takes another round.
Mhm.
So you just had to live with a dragon shows up and it takes 2 full rounds, and now you get to
Yeah.
go, which I actually really liked. Not everybody feels that way. But the way all the powers came in or the features, I didn't like feats on monsters in third, but
Mhm.
both third and fourth, I felt like you really knew that this is what it is, right? Whatever it
Yeah.
was, its presence was felt. This ancient dragon, it's solid, but if I think of what tells me it's a green dragon, right? Well, okay, it can breathe air and water, that's fine. It has advantage on initiative rolls, that's fine. That doesn't tell me anything. It rends. The rend has poison to it. And this is, I think, something we'll see in a lot of these monsters where it's sort of like I attack and I do a thing on top of my damage. So 17 piercing, 10 poison. So that's a little bit, gives you a little flavor of what's behind it.
Mhm.
Reminds you it's a green dragon. Its spell list has Cloud Kill. Okay. It also has some mind control stuff. And if we read the text, it tells us that green dragons are kind of the super schemers, corruptors kind of thing. Poison breath, of course, the breath weapon. And then we have the reactions that grows of miasma, if it gets to go off, will definitely give you that feeling that this is a green
Mhm.
dragon. So yeah, I would say that this does a pretty good job of
Mhm.
cementing that, right? Which is a big thing I look at in monsters. Does this thing feel like what it's supposed to be? I'd say here, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about numbers. Uh,
Yeah.
some of the numbers some of the numbers are hard to get a handle on just because you don't know at this point through actual play how much harder characters will hit. So hit points, I don't really care if there's a difference.
Mhm.
AC, don't really care if there's a difference. Initiative, there's a difference, right? If you look at the initiative modifier for this ancient green dragon, it is +8. If you go back and look at the 2014 dragon, ancient dragon, I think it was +1.
Wow.
And not only that, in the little parentheses next to initiative, where they give you sort of the take 10 number, since it has advantage on initiative checks, if you'd use their static initiative, just where it's going to go in relation to what the players rolled, it's a 23. Now, granted, you're going to have some high initiatives fighting this CR22 creature, but that's great as the game master. I'm not going, okay, here's the huge battle. The rogue is going to be plus 10 on their initiative. Everyone's going to be plus something. And I roll, I got a 10. Okay, plus one. Wah, wah. I love that. I love that these, at least this higher level monster, has a fighting chance to beat somebody on an initiative roll.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I like high initiative for monsters like this for sure. Um, I don't want to take apart the damage too much here comparison wise, but we can do that with the gold dragon, which could be interesting to do.
Okay. Yeah. What one other thing is based on what the 2014 Green Ancient Dream Dragon was. This one will have one more legendary resistance, two more if it's in its lair, which
Mm-hmm.
I thought was probably based on DM feedback of I use all my legendary resistances in the first round. Uh, and I didn't see any frightful presence in this stat block.
Yeah.
Uh, so we'll have to take a look at the gold dragon to see if that's something that was added back or not.
Yeah, I like the awe-inspiring idea, right? That just dragons are
Right.
awe-inspiring. When they show up, you probably lose your turn or have fear or something like that. I like that, so I miss it not seeing there.
Mhm. Should we do the Kuo-Toa next?
Yeah.
Okay, Kuo-Toa is a similar thing to the Green Dragon. This was a preview, so we can assume that some changes have been made, but let's take a look. Uh, I'm just focusing really on like wording and massive number changes.
Mm-hmm.
And we get this awkward, we have the slippery ability, which is a reaction that's very awkwardly worded trigger. It's Kuo-Toa. If the Kuo-Toa has the grappled condition at the end of a creature's turn, it can use its reaction to no longer be grappled. And I'm like, okay, so any creature's turn, anywhere in the battle, anywhere in the world, what, why not just say immune to grappled? Right? You already have a line with immunities. Just say it can't be grappled because that's basically what you're trying to do here. Except maybe that if it can't take a reaction, then it remains grappled. But eh,
Yeah, I think
that's a
both
lot
this
of.
guy and we'll talk about the gelatinous cube, but both of them had, they have features they had before because there is a
Mhm,
sticky shield for the 2014 version, but the wording has been changed.
mhm.
And I don't know that it's vastly better. Again, like is it
Yeah,
demonstrably better wording? I don't know. It's not that it's, I think I can figure out what's going on, but it's not really fewer words. It looks pretty similar to me. Maybe it's a tiny bit. I don't know. It looks the same to me in terms of just eyeballing it, and it isn't like an absolute like, oh yeah, I read this and this makes perfect sense, and that sort of
right.
surprises me. And the same thing with the gelatinous cube when we talk about that one, like it just doesn't automatically seem to me like, oh yeah, this is super 100% clear and I'm all good here. I'm so glad you revised this. And maybe at
Right.
this point it's worth saying like if you had told me, hey, look, the D&D team is gonna revise 5e, but
Mhm,
it's not a new edition. I
mhm.
would have thought, yeah, okay, so most of the monsters will probably be the same.
Right.
No. When they say that whole, we've talked about this on the show, everything is new. eh, Good grief, they really did like go through and try to. It's almost like they didn't. They tried to change everything.
Mhm.
They have tried to revise every little block here, and it's a miracle if one of them survived unchanged, right? So, like the amphibious trait is the same, you know.
Right.
But
Yeah.
other than that, it's like they have tweaked every little block. And again, I have to say, is it demonstrably better? And if not, well, why did you
Right.
feel you needed to tweak this when it's not a new edition? And I don't
Yeah.
quite grasp
The,
it. I mean, the only thing I can think of is because we thought it would sell better that way. I don't know.
yeah.
Or
Yeah.
maybe
The
just
sticky
like we really
shield
felt
thing.
like we had 10 years worth of experience and every little block could use a tweak.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I can understand the desire to update the rules and make it a much better mechanical experience for
Mm-hmm.
people that are playing the game mechanically. So capitalize words. Don't love it.
Yeah.
Understand that tendency to do. But we get something like the sticky shield.
Mhm.
So it's while stuck. In other words, you hit the Kuo-Toa. It's got a sticky shield. You miss as a reaction. They stick the weapon to the shield, and so it says while stuck, the weapon can't be used. Now, if we're playing a game that's more narrative based, cool. There we go. But I'm going to come up against, at not a very high level, somebody who has a sword or a weapon that can also be used to cast spells from, right? You can cast a fireball from this quarterstaff. So you
Mhm.
go up and you hit the monster with the quarterstaff. Okay, it's stuck and the weapon can't be used. But can I cast a fireball from it? Well, no, it says the weapon can't be used. Well, that's not using the weapon, right? And you've actually created all of the things that you need
Yeah.
to say, while stuck, the weapon cannot be used to make a melee or ranged weapon attack, whatever. You've made it actions, right? You can still use the magic action
Mm.
to, but whatever. Uh, you've done it. So go through with it. Go all the way. Show 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 me how to run this game that you have so carefully created the words to match.
Yeah, and in this case, that kind of wording of the weapon can't be used was in the 2014 version, and so they could
Right,
have gone through and improved that, but they didn't, right?
right.
Which is
Exactly,
interesting.
exactly.
But
Yeah,
why, if you're going to be tweaking every little block of text, and you did change this up,
yeah.
why? Why didn't you? Yeah, I don't know. And maybe they didn't care about that, or who knows? They're human. Maybe they didn't think about that situation. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And the last thing about the Kuo-Toa is the sticky net. Uh,
Mhm.
so I'm cool with it, right? They throw a net on you, and you're restrained, and you need to cut it off or break out, and then the net is destroyed. Do they have more than one? It doesn't say like once per day or one time only. It's just uh,
Yeah, and that's
that
interesting because a number we'll see this and there's another monster preview that sort of has this, but some monsters have gear, but
right,
some don't. One
right,
assumes when they don't list it as gear, there's an endless number of sticky nets, I guess, right? But it's
right,
an
and
interesting thing to say. Yeah,
and
and in fact, like the strange spear that it has,
right,
it is only melee, but a lot of the ones that are range will just say like, and it returns to you. It's like, you know,
yeah,
but if it doesn't, does it matter? It's yes, not
yeah.
listed as gear, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, in that earlier
Hmm.
preview, there were, I don't think, any gear
Okay, yeah.
descriptors. So
So
we don't know.
maybe
Maybe there will be gear.
maybe we'll see.
Maybe the sticky net will be gear that you can then take, but maybe not. We don't know. Well, I can safely say that the skeleton, there is one difference between what we saw in the preview uh, and what we know is the final version because it was in the player's handbook, I believe.
Oh yeah.
The only difference is that the dex modifier of the skeleton is one higher. So there is one extra plus to hit and one extra plus to damage. And that's the only difference that I could see between the 2014 and the 2024 skull.
Yeah, which is good. I mean, I'm all for if a monster works well enough.
Yep.
You don't have to mess with it. What we see also in this preview is the warhorse skeleton, the minotaur skeleton, the flaming skeleton, and it was funny to hear Jeremy talk about, and we brought back the flaming skeleton. It's like, yeah, okay, I had that an edition ago. Like, you
Yeah.
know, but yeah, but we get a few more types here, and this is like an
Yep.
example of that idea of adding more to the monster manual at its
Mhm.
core.
Yeah.
This example and some of the others too made me wonder, going back to that at the summit where they were talking about how they were all books will remain in use and are valid, with the exception of Tasha's and Xanathar's, where we're going to use so much material from those that we
Mhm.
will reprint those with kind of new things in them. And we actually didn't see that much from Tasha's and Xanathar's make it into the core rules. And here's another thing where, like, and maybe this is deliberate because they didn't say we're going to reprint Mordenkainen's or anything like that, but I was curious whether we would see one of the many cool skeletons we've seen in other books. And the answer kind of seems to be no,
Mhm.
right? That generally we're not going to pull a monster out of another source. Maybe we'll see some exceptions to that, but it doesn't look like they've gone through and said, "Oh yeah, let's pull in this really neat monster that appears in Mordenkainen's or in Van Richten's or any of those."
Right. Yeah. Maybe. Maybe not. uh, shall we do the Cyclops?
Yeah, that's a good one. Let's do the Cyclops.
Okay. So the Cyclops in the 2014 Monster Manual, there was just Cyclops. And in the preview that we got, there were two Cyclopses, Cyclopes. There was help me out. The Sentry
Oh
is
yes,
the
Sentry.
basic one, and then the Oracle
Yeah,
was
I
the
think
sort of advanced one. I'm going from memory here, but I think that was that. So
Sentry.
any special things that you noticed about that, Teos?
Yes, we had a lot of fun breaking this down on our Discord, and what I find interesting about there are a number of things I find to be really, really very interesting about the Cyclops. Um, One is that we see a very different approach to the lore of the monster, which we haven't kind of super talked about that angle of it. But one of the questions is, okay, what do you do? How do you handle your lore from one edition to the other, especially when it's not a change in edition in theory? And the answer is, well, we've changed a lot. Like there is a
Mhm.
lot that's different here. And the Cyclops is a great example of that because if I were to say to you, what do you think about where do you go back when you think Cyclops? What famous work do you think of?
Right. You think of the Odyssey.
Yeah. You're thinking Jason Argonauts. You're thinking about this kind of dumb brute that can't has to feel for you once it's blinded and stuff. That kind of and if you go back and read the 2014 description, of the Cyclops, it has, and I like this about fifth edition 2014. Fifth edition has those kinds of like generally three things, sometimes four, that
Mhm.
are in
Mhm.
bold italic that tell you
Yep.
sort of the key things about the monster.
Yeah.
So here it says non-religious,
Mhm.
unsophisticated,
Mhm.
unwise.
Mhm.
And then it goes on to give you quite a good number of words. And I forget what the number breakdown was, but I did look at the word count, and the word count is far higher on the other version.
Mhm.
Here, we get the name Cyclops, and then it just says monocular servants of destiny.
Mhm. Yep.
And then it says they're descendants of the gods using their mystical vision. And I'm like, what?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so are we suddenly saying that Dungeons and Dragons no longer has the kinds of Cyclops that we've been putting in all our adventures? And because the whole idea that they said on the videos was we're working hard to bring forth what these monsters are, not necessarily mythology, but in D&D.
Mhm.
Well, boy, we've had that. We've kind of had the mythical
Yeah.
version, the Greek version in D&D,
Yeah.
and suddenly we don't. And they talked about the art being symbolic of the monster in D&D. And when I look at the art that they showed off, it's two Cyclops. One of them looks like you wouldn't even guess it's a Cyclops. You'd guess it was
Right.
like a cloud giant or something with robes and it's
Yeah.
spellcasting and weaving some sort of arcane whatever. And then you've got one wearing all these tattoos, chucking a rock, and behind them, what look like sort of like Greek architecture ruins.
Mhm.
And none of this is to me the cave sheep, whatever that probably would have been used in your average D&D
Yeah.
adventure. So I find that fascinating.
The only thing I was going to look and I didn't get a chance was the Theros book.
Oh
The
yeah.
Greek inspired book. I'm
Oh, good
wondering, I
call.
think there were Cyclopes uh, in that, and I don't know if they were sort of updated versions of this.
Oh, maybe
Uh,
so. Yeah. Huh. Well,
what
yeah.
caught my, yeah, go ahead.
But it is so interesting that this idea of deliberately like the fourth edition, or sorry, fourth edition, the 2014 version is a very simple stat block.
Very.
And what's interesting here
Thankfully.
is even the Cyclops Sentry, the lower CR one, which is the same CR as the old one, it has gotten a little more complicated. So the old one has poor depth perception, and then a multi-attack with 2 great clubs, and has a great club and the ability to throw a rock.
Yep.
Now we have those things, but also this limited foresight, and it loses that poor depth perception. So it's a very interesting change here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was my take on that.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm fine with both. I'm actually fine with the old Cyclops, and I'm fine with the new Cyclops. For me, what's most important is if it's going to have lore, make that lore count. And if it's going to have special, unique physical features, make those count. So what's the thing you think of when you think of Cyclops? Like you said, you think of the one eye.
Yeah.
So that one eye needs to have a game impact. In 2014, that game impact was a negative. Right? It was a negative. It was poor depth perception. And how did that show off in play? They had disadvantage on ranged attacks of over 30 feet. So they couldn't throw the rock well over 30 feet. How often were you throwing rocks with your Cyclopes in 2014? I hope maybe only once. And even then, unless you made a big deal about it as the game master, oh, look, you're far away and he's squinting, trying to figure out where you are. I have disadvantage. Whee! And you'd roll 2 dice. That's fine, but it doesn't sort of live up to that.
Well, I don't know.
20...
I'll disagree a bit in that I think that the point of it is this thing does more damage with its club in 2014. It gets to attack twice with its club, and it's going to be more accurate if it's at range than if it's at range. So it's your choice. The logic is here, and you can decide whether you want to play up to it. And it sort of creates that Argonaut scenario where if you can get away from it, now it can't do a whole lot to you, right? And so you can play with that if you want, whereas a lot of monsters don't have those kinds of obvious flaws. To me, this was a good example of a monster with an obvious flaw that if you want to, you can play up. You can, of course, just have it be like the big thing that's going to smash you with a club. But to me, it had that. I don't know.
You can play it up if you set up a very specific scenario.
Yes.
Absolutely. My big issue, and it's not just with the Cyclops, it's with all of these sort of mythological or story focused monsters from various worlds and lore. If I'm running a game for all new players who are even fairly well read in mythology, I say, and you approach the temple and there's a guard standing there, it's a Cyclops. What's the first thing they're going to try to do? They're going to try to shoot its eye out, right?
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
Called shot to the eye.
Exactly. We try to hit it in the eye so it can't see us. It's the first thing they're going to try to do. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's
totally
historical. It's what rational adventurers would do. But there's no way we can do that.
Yeah.
There's no way we could do that. Even something like make it have disadvantage on saves against the blinded condition. Right. Something so that the players feel like they're engaging with the monster in the way that they feel like they should be engaging with it, and you're rewarding them for it.
Yeah.
Now, the risk of that, of course, is every encounter then with a Cyclops from now until the end of time, the power gaming group is going to be like, well, let me we blind it. And so it's that sort of thing that when I see a monster manual being made, I want the designers thinking about that.
So a possibility here, Shawn, is that what the designers did, maybe even after a review, is conclude that the 2014 Cyclops kind of says, if you have one eye, you're dumb. And I think there's a fine line between that and the problems that involves, and saying, look, if we have 2 working eyes, we probably don't want to lose one, right? Or if we have one, we don't want to lose it, which is logical, right? And maybe they've gone a little far here in trying to. I think it's okay to have monsters that have limits, and they don't always have to have real world. I can see why they, if that was the reason, I can understand the motive, and even applaud it to some extent. But I think that in this case, sometimes a creature has a weakness, right? And it isn't always going to link back to our real world. I thought with a Cyclops in general, it worked, but there have been moves around vision and loss of auditory capability where there's an attempt to clean that up, and so maybe this is another of these cases.
It could possibly be, and I'm okay with the lore. I'm okay with this change to have them be.
So I'm not, just because bigger. There is so little said, right? If I tell you one-eyed descendants of the gods, using their mystical vision, they can witness how future events are likely to occur. The Cyclops Oracle gazes through history to learn hidden truths. Many share these secrets with those who aid them. The Cyclops Sentry serve their divine progenitors and oppose those who would tamper with fate. I don't really know what to do with that, Shawn. It's really rough. Like those descriptions could be for any number of monsters, and I wouldn't know what to do with them. I don't know. To me, this is too. I have trouble imagining what to do with this. I mean, I can come up with something, right? But it's not, to me, it's not very grounded. It's very open. I don't know what a sentry can do. Okay, so is a sentry seeing glimpses of the future? Are these all seeing, or is it just the Oracle? Or right. There's so few words here that I end up not knowing what this monster can truly do or is meant to do in a book that they have told me is supposed to ground me in the logic of D&D. Now I don't know. Like, in the Forgotten Realms, do people now seek out Cyclops constantly? Are they revered and not fought?
Yeah, so I see the Sentry as being just a plain old Cyclops.
But what tells me that? I mean, they can literally impose disadvantage on somebody. They seem to have some sort of tie to fate. And the gods, apparently, the gods that they used to shun, they now actually somehow channel, or you gave me so little here. I don't know what this is.
I can understand that. I can understand that. I think I am adding my own twists. I think I'm seeing the encounters that I would create. So that's why I'm like, I'm fine with it. But I can totally understand that. I feel like we got about halfway through what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So we have a topic for next week. We'll finish this off, and
sounds good. It's a lot of fun, and I hope it comes across. We're a little gun shy after. At least I'm a little gun shy after Shadow Dark. This does not mean that don't think I'm going to have fun with 2024 monsters, this is design analysis, right? And I could be in a room with folks who are designing this. If I were lucky enough to be in a room with folks who are designing this, and I could share these things, I could totally see myself going like, "Oh, okay, let's ship it the way you did it." That's all possible. But these are the questions that the kind of thinking we would ask if we were trying to analyze the design, right?
Right, or design ourselves. And I have been in exact situations like this where I'm like, I need to put an ability in. This ability leads in this direction. Let's make the lore match. You can go a lot of different directions. And also coming from all different directions are our listeners. So you out there listening as a podcast or watching it as a show on YouTube, thank you so much. We hope that we have been entertaining and informative. If you would like to show your appreciation through our Patreon, you can do so by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. We already have quite a few people who are doing so. We have Master of Dungeon supporters. Thank you so much for giving and helping us make this show. Master of Realm supporters, the wonderful list of those folks are right here in our show notes. And the Masters of the Multiverse, they get a shout out on the show. Bottom up this time, Z. Walt Winfrey, Zach Types, Chris Webster, Javier Waziak, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Graham Ward, James Walton, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, Joe Tyler, Trace, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Spark from Dunor Games, Krishna Simonse, Andy Shockney, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Runner Rick, Ozymandias Rex, Pugnus, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. I hope the show went well, Phil. David Norris, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, Falcon Neal, Shawn Molly, Mighty Zeus, John Mickey, Trey McLemore, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Eric Mengi, the Mathemagician, Paul Mata, Chad Lynch, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Brian King, condolences on the Lions season, JR of the Twilight Perspective, The Mighty Jerd, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, Hyperlexic, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, William Harshman of Runeforged Tabletop Gaming, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studio, James Fisher, Andy Edmonds at NerdRonomicon.com, Will Doyle, Evan at Nimbleco, Evil John, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Eric Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Dave Bastiensen, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Keith Emmon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and Agilmonk of Fantasy Campaign Companion Workshops. Thank you so much for your support. Again, you can go to patreon.com. Matreon.com is something different. Patreon.com/masteringdnd. If you get a chance, you can also leave us a review wherever you listen to the show, or go to YouTube and click that little subscribe like thingy, and that would really help us out. Teos, I know that you are super busy on your stuff, so tell us what you're up to and where we can find it.
You can find me at alphastream.org. From there, you can get to my YouTubes. I just published it's a blog article that I had before on themes and truths in your campaign, and now there's a video-based version of it you can check out there. Shawn, where do we find you?
You can find me on the show socials at Shawn. That's SHAWN Merwin. You can follow the podcast at Mastering D&D on those same socials. And go to Patreon. You can talk to us on our Patreon Discord. And YouTube, youtube.com at Mastering Dungeons. So we're working our way through monsters. We're working our way there. What should we do now?
Well, I'm going to go to matreon.com. That sounded amazing.
Yeah. And I'm going to consult the oracle of the local Cyclops to see what my future holds.